Hi everyone, welcome to Next of Kin, Perspectives on Animal Ethics and Biodiversity. I'm so pleased you're joining me this semester for this course. I am Dr. Elizabeth Allison. I'm a faculty member in Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness, as well as the founder and chair of Ecology, Spirituality, and Religion. In this short video, I want to give you an overview of this course, Next of Kin, talk about some of the major themes that we'll be discussing, some of the issues that run throughout the course, and our method for this course. As you'll see on the syllabus, I have divided it into 4 parts that deal with ontology, epistemology, ethics, and justice. And this 4-part division represents a method of teaching environmental studies that I have developed over the last decade or so, whereby we first explore what is the issue or question of concern. What exists is basically what is this topic that we're pursuing. So in our section on ontology, we're asking, what is the animal? What different ways do we have to know and learn about non-human animals? And you see that immediately takes us into knowing, or epistemology. How do we know about non-human animals? So in our ontology section, we'll be first looking at religious and historical perspectives on non-human animals. We'll be asking what sorts of cultural and religious and historical inheritances do we have in different traditions that really offer very different perspectives on non-human animals. So right away we see that the animal or non-human animals are not just one thing, they're not homogenized, but there are a lot of different perspectives on what animals are like and a lot of different ways of learning about animals. We'll also look at some biological perspectives from biologist Carl Safina, who gives us a window into not only animals as sort of machines, living machines, but also as social beings, and shows us how they have family units and how they care for one another. So again, we sort of expand the idea of the animal beyond sort of a meat machine to this really multifaceted being that takes so many different forms. So our first exploration is what kind of animals are out there, what is the animal, how do humans define non-human animals? And then, as I said, that takes us into questions of epistemology and how we know. So we'll be exploring the sort of edges of knowledge about non-human animals, looking at ethology and animal behavior studies that show that many non-human animals have many of the qualities that we typically ascribe to humans, and many of the qualities that we typically use to separate humans from non-humans. But it turns out that contemporary research is showing those divisions don't hold up so well. So we'll be looking at the morality of non-human animals, and we'll be looking at communication and companionship between and among non-human animals and between non-human animals and humans. And then we turn towards our ethical perspectives and we ask, what actions would a virtuous person do in relation to non-human animals? What kind of behaviors and actions would be appropriate given what we know about non-human animals and what we understand about their variety and their diversity and their capacities? So at that point we turn to food animals and factory farming, certainly a very fraught issue in animal ethics. We also, of course, consider meat eating in that part. And I know that people have a range of perspectives and opinions about this. All perspectives are welcome here. Our challenge is to explore these diverse perspectives in conversation and to try to develop more fully articulated opinions and perspectives that are supported by evidence and information that can give us really well-argued viewpoints. So we'll be exploring food animals, factory farming, animal rights, animal experimentation, animals in laboratories, looking at how animals are often used instrumentally for human societies and examining whether that's ethically appropriate, what sort of challenges there are to those instrumental uses of non-human animals, and what kind of alternatives may exist to possibly approach non-human animals in a different way. We'll also be considering wild animals and wild biodiversity. As you know, humans have become a dominating force on Earth and have extirpated many wild species and decimated many wild habitats, creating a greater difficulty for wild species. In fact, in terms of mammalian biomass of mammals, which is not all animals, of course, birds and insects and amphibians and reptiles are also animals, but in terms of mammalian biomass, our domestic animals, primarily cows and pigs, comprise 60% of the mammalian biomass on Earth, and humans are 36% of the mammalian biomass on Earth, which means that wild living mammals are only 4% of the mammalian biomass on Earth. So our domestic animals have really overwhelmed the space for wild species, and we'll consider the implications of that for wild species and examine how efforts to protect and preserve wild species are engaging with ethical perspectives. And then in our final section of this course, we turn to politics and justice, and we try to contextualize what we've studied about what animals are, how we know about animals, how ethical humans behave toward animals, and we'll look at what may be possible to make space for non-human animals in relation to humans. So we'll be looking at some of the efforts to restore and preserve wild biodiversity and some of the edges of that in terms of even de-extinction as a possibility and rewilding as a possibility. And we'll be looking at the ethics of captivity, whether that really does help preserve wild species and endangered species or not. So we're kind of exploring the edges there of efforts to preserve wildlife and biodiversity. And we conclude with looking at the inescapable entanglements of humanity and animals, non-human animals. We're inextricably interdependent with non-human animals. We depend on animals for food, for water, for shelter, for clothing, for medicines, for entertainment and companionship, and for beauty and inspiration and awe, watching birds, watching butterflies, watching wild predators out in wilderness. So in this interdependence, we really are bound up with non-human animals, but often that's not at the top of humans' mind. And not only are we dependent on these visible non-human animals, but we are also interdependent with microorganisms. And the COVID pandemic has shown us how strongly our lives can be affected by microorganisms, to the extent that The whole global economy was shut down for some months in 2020. And as you may be aware, that it's understood that the coronavirus is a zoonotic disease that existed in bats most likely before jumping to humans, possibly in a animal so-called wet market in China, where a wide variety of wildlife was available for sale for human consumption. So we see in that example how complicated the human relationship with non-human animals is, how our health and well-being is affected by the ways that we treat non-human animals. One of the concerns about that wet market was that animals were in very close, crowded conditions with species that they would never be near out in the wild. And so that created a perfect condition for diseases to jump, microorganisms to jump between different animals, created kind of a petri dish that ultimately led to this virus that could jump to humans. So how do we care for human health when the eradication of wild habitats is potentially causing wildlife to become more crowded and to interact with species that they would not normally interact with, and allowing viruses and bacteria to evolve more rapidly, to move between species more easily, and then potentially to move to humans. So we conclude our course with the considerations of those types of issues about the interdependence of human health and wildlife health and biodiversity preservation. And there's been a lot of research and writing about those topics in the last couple of years as scientists have struggled to understand the COVID pandemic, and as people have struggled to make sense of the ethics and politics and justice aspect of it. So we are presented with a very apt case study to bring our insights about wild animals and domestic animals and human interactions with non-human animals, to bring our insights about those into this very current case study. So that is the trajectory of the course and the topics that we'll be discussing this semester. I encourage you to read the full syllabus, which is available on the Canvas website. It has a lot more information about the readings and the assignments and the methods of this course. There's also a second PowerPoint lecture in this module that describes the relational spiral of integral ecology, which is our method, this method of examining ontology, epistemology, ethics, and justice. So I encourage you to listen to that next. And let's see. I wanted to say briefly something about the assignments that we'll be working on. Our main tool for inquiry this semester is the use of the Canvas discussion board. And there will be prompts in each module to respond to and guidance about how to write your response. And then I would like you to engage with your colleagues in this course and respond to their statements, asking questions, seeking clarification, making connections between an insight or understanding that you have that might build their point further or stretch it further. So we really want to have a lively discussion in that discussion board. If we were face-to-face in class, my method is generally to share some information and then really to have a lively discussion in class. And so I'm trying to replicate this in the online space. And I encourage you to consider your colleagues in the class as colleagues, as co-learners and also co-teachers from whom you can learn and with whom you can build new ideas and new insights together. Let's think of the discussion board not as the final word on any particular topic, but a way that we can play with ideas and develop our thoughts and our insights there. So we'll be spending a lot of time there. There's a midterm paper that asks how animals make you human, and I'll talk more about that closer to the time in October. But you can start thinking now about how does the concept of non-human animals that are distinct from human beings, how does that actually generate your own humanity? We'll talk more about that as we go on. And then we have a concluding research paper, as many courses do. I'll be looking for an abstract and outline in November that will tell me generally what you're going to be writing about, and the final paper later in mid-December. So you can begin thinking now if there's a particular issue that brought you into this class, a particular aspect of non-human animals that you want to explore. You can have that in your mind as you begin the readings in this course. And in this first module, we look at how oppression of women and other oppressed groups parallels the oppression of non-human animals. This is a challenging and sometimes controversial notion that the dynamics of oppression that women and other oppressed groups face are similar to the dynamics that animals face. And some people object because they rather see humans situated above non-human animals. So I bring this to your attention as you go into these readings, that they are challenging, and some people have definitely taken issue with these readings. Again, our goal here is to examine a range of ideas and then allow each person in this class to hopefully develop their own well-articulated, well-supported with evidence personal ethic in relation to non-human animals. And so a variety of perspectives can feed into that. And I hope you'll approach these different perspectives with an open mind and see what you can take from them to support your own ethic. And I think in closing today, I just want to say that this is a vitally important topic, not only for the well-being of our domestic animals. We'll learn more about their conditions and efforts to improve their conditions, but also for wild animals and biological diversity. In 2019, two major reports came out, both of which pointed to the tremendous loss of biological diversity in the last 50 years because of the intensification of human use of the planet. So habitat destruction, fragmentation, harvesting of non-human animals, slaughter, the wildlife trade, urbanization, pollution, all these climate change, all these dynamics work together to make life much harder for non-human animals. And the IPBES report on biodiversity reported that 70% of the world has been altered by humans. So humans are making use of nearly 3/4 of the world. There's very few places that are only for wild biodiversity, and those tend to be on mountaintops, at the poles, in quite remote areas. And the other report was from the World Wildlife Fund that found that on average the populations of wild species are 68% smaller than they were 50 years ago. So as a population, whatever a population of otters or elk or blue jays, those populations tend to be 68% smaller than they were 50 years ago. So again, quite concerning. I will post actually both of these reports for your reference if you want to look at them further. They both have tons of detail and information. But so we see that non-human animals are definitely compromised these days. And does that oppression mirror the oppression of oppressed human groups or not? And what ethical tools can we use to examine the conditions of non-human animals? These are some of the questions that we'll be discussing during this semester. Also, I think I want to say that some of this information can be challenging, especially if you experience a lot of empathy with non-human animals. Sometimes people find themselves really upset as they learn about the treatment of some non-human animals. So if that is the case, please do moderate your exposure to the information. Don't overwhelm yourself with this information, and take breaks as you need to. If you're really finding difficulty, please talk to me, reach out to me, and we'll work together to figure out how you can moderate your exposure so that you can continue to study the material without becoming overwhelmed by it. So thank you for being here with me this semester, and I look forward to seeing you on the discussion board. Bye for now.